There is a name sitting in your family records right now that was never supposed to survive. For 600 years, an empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, and it left almost no paperwork behind for ordinary families. No fixed surnames. No neat genealogical chain connecting a farmer in Anatolia to his great-great-grandfather. For most people who lived inside the Ottoman world, identity was fluid. A first name, a father's name, a trade, a village. That was enough. And then in 1934, the empire had already been gone for over a decade, and a new republic did something almost nobody expected. It ordered every family in Turkey to choose a surname. Almost overnight, centuries of oral memory, military rank, craft tradition, and regional identity had to be compressed into a single word, chosen in a matter of weeks. Some families reached backward. They pulled a title, a profession, a place, a rank that had belonged to an ancestor, real or half-remembered, and turned it into a permanent name. Others invented something new entirely. The result is a strange archive hiding in plain sight. Surnames that look ordinary today, but that were, for a brief window in history, doors into the old imperial world. This is not a story about proving bloodlines. Genetics does not work that way, and no name on a birth certificate can certify who your ancestors were 7 generations back. But names are not nothing either. They are fossils of choice, records of what a family in 1934, standing at the edge of a vanished empire, decided was worth remembering. And when you start reading them carefully, a surprising number of ordinary Turkish, Balkan, and Middle Eastern surnames turn out to be pointing at something much older than a paperwork deadline. Here is what 14 of them actually reveal. The first is Pasha, or its many spellings, Pasha, Basha, Pashazade. In the Ottoman system, Pasha was not a birthright. It was the highest civil and military rank the empire could grant a man, and it was awarded, not inherited. A family carrying some version of this name today is not necessarily descended from a Pasha. But the name itself is a message a household chose to send in 1934, a claim to a memory of rank, whether that memory belonged to a great-grandfather, a distant relative, or simply local reputation. It tells you the family wanted the world to remember that somewhere in their story, someone had stood close to power. The second is Bey or Beyoglu, son of the Bey. A Bey was a regional lord, a tribal chief, or a senior officer, depending on the century and the province. Where Pasha pointed toward the imperial center, Bey often pointed toward the edges, the frontier lords who governed in the sultan's name but lived far from the capital, closer to the people they ruled. Families who chose this surname were frequently marking descent from local authority rather than central power. A subtle distinction, but a real one. If stories like this interest you, where an ordinary word turns out to be carrying centuries of buried meaning, this is the kind of history I dig into regularly, so it might be worth subscribing before we go further, because the next names get stranger. The third is Shelebi. This one is easy to misread as simply gentleman, and in modern Turkish that is close enough. But in the Ottoman period, Shelebi was a specific honorific for the educated, poets, scholars, mystics, sons of prominent families who had studied rather than fought. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, was addressed this way by his followers. A family that took this name in 1934 was making a quiet claim, not to military glory, but to literacy, learning, and refinement, in a period when most of the empire could not read at all. The fourth is Aga. This title is where things get genuinely tangled, because Aga meant different things in different centuries. A military commander of the elite Janissary Corps, a wealthy landowner, or simply master in a household sense. A surname built on this word could be honoring a soldier, a estate holder, or a local strongman, and without additional family records, there is often no way to know which. That ambiguity is not a flaw in the story. It is the story, a reminder that a single title could sit on top of wildly different lives. The fifth and sixth are occupational, Bakirci, meaning coppersmith, and Demirci, meaning blacksmith. These are unglamorous compared to Pasha or Bey, but they are arguably more historically reliable, because craft guilds in Ottoman cities were tightly organized, hereditary in practice if not in law, and deeply tied to specific neighborhoods. A family named for copperwork was very likely echoing generations of literal, physical labor passed from father to son inside a guild structure that controlled prices, apprenticeships, and even where you were allowed to live in a city like Istanbul or Aleppo. The seventh is Kadi, or Kadioglu, son of the judge. In the Ottoman legal system, the Kadi was not just a judge but a central pillar of provincial administration, someone who managed disputes, contracts, taxation records, and local governance according to Islamic law. A surname built on this word is pointing toward a family that once sat, quite literally, at the intersection of law and power in a town or district. Here is where the story starts to widen rather than settle. Because not every meaningful surname in this list points toward privilege. Some point toward something far darker and far more central to how the empire actually worked. The devshirme system, the forced levy of Christian boys from the Balkans, taken from their families, converted, and raised inside the Ottoman military and administrative machine. Some of the empire's most powerful pashas and grand viziers began this way, stripped of their birth names and given new Ottoman identities entirely. A surname claiming elite Ottoman rank might, in a small number of documented cases, actually be tracing back not to a Turkish or Muslim family line at all, but to a Balkan Christian child absorbed into empire generations earlier. This does not prove anything about any specific family, but it complicates the entire idea that Ottoman surname and Ottoman bloodline mean the same thing. That is the eighth and ninth threads worth naming. Koz, often meaning beardless, sometimes a physical description, but in some regions a marker tied to Balkan origin families adapting to Ottoman naming custom, and Bosnak, meaning simply Bosnian, a surname that openly announces migration rather than hiding it. Families across Anatolia and the wider Ottoman world carry Bosnak, Arnavut for Albanian, Sirks for Circassian, Kurt for Kurdish, surnames that are not claims to central Ottoman power at all, but honest markers of the empire's staggering internal diversity. The Ottoman world was never one bloodline building one empire. It was dozens of peoples, pulled together by conquest, migration, and administration, and these surnames are the fingerprints they left when they chose, generations later, not to erase where they came from. The 10th is Janissary-derived names, referencing the Janissaries themselves, the elite infantry corps originally built from devshirme conscripts, who became one of the most feared and politically powerful forces in the empire before being violently dissolved in 1826. A family surname echoing this word is invoking one of the most complicated legacies in Ottoman history: soldiers who were simultaneously slaves of the state, the empire's military backbone, and eventually a political faction so powerful the Sultan had to destroy them. The 11th and 12th are toponymic, surnames built from place names, like Kenyali, from Konya, or Halapli, from Aleppo. These are some of the most genuinely useful surnames for anyone researching family history, because they often preserve something more concrete than a rank or title, an actual point on the map where a family stood at a specific moment before migration scattered them elsewhere in the empire. The 13th is Serif or Serifoglu, descendant of the Sharif, a title reserved in the Islamic world for those claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad through his grandson. This is one of the rare cases where a surname is making an explicit genealogical claim rather than an administrative or occupational one, and it is a claim that, in some families, is genuinely documented across centuries through religious and legal records, in a way most Ottoman lineages simply are not. And the 14th is one of the quietest, Hoka or Hokeaglu, teacher or religious instructor. Unlike Pasha or Bey, this name carries no whisper of political power. It points toward the men who taught children to read the Quran, who ran the small neighborhood schools that existed in nearly every Ottoman town, and whose influence on daily life may have outlasted that of any general or governor, simply because it touched every generation in every street, without exception. Picture, for a moment, an Anatolian valley in late autumn, sometime in the last years of the empire. Smoke rising from a copper workshop. A judge's clerk walking toward the mosque with a ledger under his arm. A boy taken years earlier from a Balkan village, now grown, now an officer, riding past a family who has never left this valley in 300 years. All of them, in this single afternoon, are living inside the same imperial system, And none of them know that within a generation or two, their descendants will be asked to compress everything they are into a single inherited word. That is what makes this list more than a curiosity. It is not proof of who built an empire. Empires are never built by bloodlines. They are built by soldiers and scribes and blacksmiths and judges and conscripted children and poets and farmers, layered on top of each other for centuries, most of them leaving no trace at. What a surname preserves is not blood. It is memory, fragile, chosen, sometimes accurate and sometimes aspirational, but real in what it tells us about what a family in 1934 wanted the future to know about their past. If your name is on this list, it does not certify an imperial bloodline. But it does mean that somewhere behind you, a family made a decision, in a narrow window of history, about which fragment of a 600-year-old world was worth carrying forward. That decision survived the fall of an empire, 2 world wars, and a century of change, and it is sitting quietly in your name right now. The map of who built the Ottoman Empire was never a single bloodline. It was thousands of separate lives, coppersmiths and judges and conscripts and poets, and the names left behind are not a genetic record. They are something rarer, a trail of memory, chosen on purpose, still legible if you know how to read it. If you want more of these hidden histories, the ones sitting quietly inside ordinary words, let me know in the comments which name or empire I should trace next.